Hi everyone, thanks for joining our webinar today, which is co-hosted by WeedSmart and Southern Farming Systems, thanks to GRDC. My name's Shannon and I'm the Communications Officer here at WeedSmart. For those unfamiliar with WeedSmart, we are an industry-funded extension platform delivering science-backed weed control solutions to growers and advisors. Before we launch into the webinar, I would like to acknowledge the WeedSmart partners, which you can see on the screen. You'll see all of the companies above the line are our financial contributors, and everybody below the line are our in-kind stakeholders. So big thanks to the valuable contribution of these companies. Today I'm also joined by WeedSmart's Southern Extension agronomist, Greg Condon. He'll take you through some weed control solutions for ryegrass in the High Rainfall Zone. And I'm also joined by Ian Herbert from Southern Farming Systems and Michael Chilvers, who's a Tasmanian grower and a GRDC Southern panel member. I'll hand over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Shannon. Good afternoon, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Greg Condon. Like Shannon said, I'm the extension agronomist in Southern New South Wales, but cover off on the southern region. So we work across the whole country, but today we're a little bit out of our comfort zone, and we're looking at the Tasmanian cropping zone and mixed farming zone, and then how we can implement some of the WeedSmart tools for managing ryegrass in particular, but it applies to all weeds that these growers are dealing with. So we'll, as mentioned, recognise Southern Farming Systems for the contribution and their initiative to get this up and going, and their funding from GRDC. So originally we planned, Ian Herbert from Southern Farming Systems approached us at WeedSmart to have a session at the Ringwood Hotel in Cressy, so in March, but which would have been good because it would have been an opportunity to tour around some of the growers and see the farming systems in place, because obviously I'm well out of my comfort zone. So everyone's always wary of people coming from outside areas and providing information or advice on managing things that they're already dealing with. So that didn't come off. So hence we've ended up with a webinar, and thanks to Shannon for pulling it together. So I've got a brains trust. Obviously, being an outsider, there's no way I would have been able to pull all this together. So I really thank a couple of growers, and Michael Chilvers, who's on the webinar today, was really generous in his information, like sharing what their challenges are, some of the trigger points for where ryegrass has really sort of got some hold on, and then how they managed to get on top of it, and the farming systems he has, and Angus Lyon as well. So I had a good chat to Angus yesterday about his change of direction. He's been farming for 10 years and then has really shifted the focus in his business as to how he can remain profitable but still manage a problematic weed like ryegrass. And there are a few other involved as well. So Ian Herbert, as we mentioned before, from Southern Farming Systems, and Terry Horan, who was an agronomist from Roberts Limited in Tasmania. Terry's been instrumental in working with these growers and giving them the confidence to, I guess, look at ways that have probably not been previously used, and some of the emerging farming systems. So, and that's yours truly in the middle with Ian and Terry. So we'll get into it. So some take-home messages. The high rainfall zone cropping area of Tasmania is complex. So it's really quite, as you'll see in the themes later on, it's quite different to other high rainfall zones of Australia, and ryegrass can dominate. It's an area that has a lot of diversity, so that's something that is recognised as a trump card. So you can grow a whole range of crops. You've got irrigation, you've got livestock, you've got winter and summer cropping, but that diversity is also the nemesis. So it can actually create simplistic herbicide programs that have allowed something like ryegrass, particularly in a winter farming system, to take hold. But I guess the encouraging thing is, and that's a key theme of WeedSmart, is that we want to highlight that the growers that I've mentioned and others that I haven't mentioned here, along with their agronomists, are really juggling these systems to actually beat ryegrass, and it is achievable. We don't want to see it limiting profit and limiting crop choice. So there's lots of ways of doing it. Herbicides are number one, but there's also a whole range of non-chemical tools which I would like to highlight to you. So with WeedSmart, we've come up with a summary of IWM tools, and we call it the WeedSmart Big Six, and they're practical strategies that involve a mix of good science and on-farm systems that have been put together by growers and industry. So some key ones I've drawn out from the Tasmanian system that really from the Big Six is the crop diversity tool. Crop competition is a big one I'll talk a lot about, and then mixing and rotating of herbicides. So that's already going on, but if we sort of put these three ones together, we can sort of see there's a lot of value in staying profitable, but also keeping ryegrass pressure low. So I guess historically WeedSmart, coming out of Western Australia, people have the thinking that it's all based on harvest weed seed control, narrow windrow burning. It couldn't be further from reality. So we're, I guess, presenting other tactics that aren't necessarily revolving harvest weed seed control. So what is actually WeedSmart? So like Shannon introduced, we focused on messages around low weed seed banks, farming systems and profit. So rather than just say, oh, here's integrated weed management, and you can see people's eyes glaze over when you're in a meeting, thinking, oh, here we go, here's another description. We actually sort of talk about farmers being profitable and how the farming systems are number one, and the weeds really have to be sort of second place. So they shouldn't be driving crop choice or allocation of resources. They're sort of something that needs to be managed, but not be the driver. So it's a blend of practical tools and science, and it's about sharing experiences. So just my chat with Michael and Terry Horan and Angus yesterday really sort of highlighted the stories they have within their own businesses and their own client groups and how important that is. So a lot of that is grower to grower sharing, and then there's agronomist to grower as well. So they're probably some of the more common, I guess, information transfer strategies that go on. But also we're seeing a lot more through WeedSmart. We use agronomist to agronomist, so people have good ideas, and they might be shared at conferences or in social media. But the big one I get a lot of value from, as an agronomist of 25 years, is actually listening to some of these growers. They are just, I guess, having to come up with options in their own business. They take the blend of the science and the tools, but they put it into a system. So they want to grow spring barley. How is it actually going to work? And then they can actually impart that knowledge to their agronomist and come up with a formulated plan that all works together. So that's WeedSmart. I'm not sure how aware everyone in Tasmania is with WeedSmart or the High Rainfall Zone, but that's what we do. And it really is unique. So globally, I guess it's a stewardship program, but nowhere else do largely a funding body like GRDC and I guess herbicide manufacturers, chemical companies work together to fund stewardship and promote communication in chemical and non-chemical tactics. So as Shannon mentioned, all those above the line are financial partners, and we really thank them for their contribution. But then down below the line are our in-kind sponsors, and they're largely research groups and some agribusiness. So it's a melting pot of a lot of different organisations. So ryegrass, that's the challenge. And the brief Ian Herbert gave me from Southern Farming System is not only how we deal with it on an ongoing basis, but these blowouts that can occur, particularly in wet years or in challenging blocks. What are our options? So feedback from the growers suggested that winter crops are a bit of an Achilles heel, particularly canola and winter wheat. It's a long, cool season, and then you put irrigation on top of that. But basically, Angus said the ryegrass can nearly germinate for 11 out of the 12 months of the year if conditions are favourable. So we'll just keep coming. So herbicides, particularly pre-Ms, like we talk about triflural and Secura and other longer-acting herbicides, aren't having the effectiveness in this wet area. So the residuals aren't long enough, and it's something we've talked about with Michael, which made a lot of sense. So in wet seasons, the registrations for a lot of high-value residual herbicides are done for low and medium rainfall zones. So they don't have a true relevance in some of these wetter high rainfall zones. So that's really important point to note, that they just don't have the longevity of ryegrass control. And there's limited post-Ms. So we'll talk a little bit about clethodim, but it's a herbicide that gets used a lot There's a lot of pressure on it, and it's a pretty fickle chemical, particularly in a winter system. So if you look at the winter crops, we're talking about canola and winter wheat. Obviously not used in winter wheat, but if you sort of bring it into canola and then impose it through some of the spring crops as well, with I guess the poppies, and then winter beans and peas, it's used a lot. And then the other one is poor crop competition. So things like waterlogging. So it's a lot of wet seasons, and currently Tasmania is suffering from that condition, as the growers mentioned yesterday. So that really limits crop growth. So the ryegrass gets going through the winter, and then even slugs, like Terry said, the impact of slugs from year on year, taking out crop, and as soon as there's an area of crop missing, we know that that ryegrass jumps in and takes up the slack. So they're some of the challenges. They're all not insurmountable. So we just put some facts out there, and if anyone wanted, Michael, Ian want to add to it, that was sort of my take on where the challenges exist. So here's a photo of Terry Horan in a poppy crop. And all the growers and agronomists I spoke to really said there's a heavy reliance on clethodim. So it's an important herbicide, but it's used, as we said, the diverse rotations, which is something we really promote in WeedSmart, is not only your friend, but it also can be your foe, because this same herbicide is not only used in canola and fava beans, in those winter crops, but also in potatoes, carrot seed, poppies, so those sort of spring, summer broadleaf crops. So it's getting used a lot. As we know in this area, and all the good work done by Peter Botsalis from Adelaide University reflect that it has poor efficacy in cold, frosty winters. The ryegrass necessarily isn't always resistant, but often as soon as those cold conditions come, the ryegrass uptake of something like clethodim is poor. So you're colder than most other areas, looking at your latitudes, and if we're struggling with it in some of the mainland states, it's no doubt a challenge in your winter crops in the south. So 500 mils per hectare of clethodim is a standard maximum label rate on some of these crops, and that's one thing Terry really emphasised, was the risk that some growers and advisors are putting on the chemical with the strict MRL levels around grain residues. So that's a consideration. If this chemical is being overused, it will be picked up particularly in some of the grain legumes, is being tested more and more. So human consumption markets are looking harder at some of these products, and clethodim's probably on the radar. I guess one thing that we've noticed with clethodim, it's not always resistant. So people see a crop failure, a weed failure in a crop of canola particularly, and think it's blowing out with resistance. So unless you test, generally you don't really know. And it's encouraging to hear that Charles State University were doing sampling in the region this summer, but it's just a really effective. I'm happy to spend $30 or $40 a hectare on an expensive herbicide, but it's really that cost of $400 or $500 per paddock for a field test on your ryegrass testing is really valuable. So you know what levels it's resistant to, what rate response you have, and then what other herbicides will work as well. And I guess one comment I had is a product like Secura, which is a really high value residual herbicide. Just talking to the agronomists and growers yesterday prior to this webinar, it's being used a lot. There's a lot of pressure on it, and there's no doubt, as we've seen in other parts of the country, if it's any product that's used repeatedly, resistance will come your way. So overuse is a concern. Here's a photo of Michael. So it's a cracker with the snow-capped peaks in the background, and the centre pivot and brassica in the foreground. So, and this is a theme I got from all of them, was that the high rainfall zone in Tasmania is different to other HRZ areas. So, and needs to be treated and come up with their own sort of protocols around managing a challenging weed like ryegrass. So, there's some really unique crop opportunities. So the centre pivots and availability of water is fantastic. The niche markets that they have available, and the opportunity to do things like hybrid carrot seed and other pasture seed, which other parts of the country don't always have that same opportunity. So that's something that can be harnessed. So the weed control in winter crop systems is not always suited to the high rainfall zone in Tassie. That's the bottom line I got from talking to these growers. They need to innovate and come up with other ways, which they're already doing. So not sort of copy what's happening in the Western Districts of Victoria, for example. So they're really adapting and they're learning from the best. So I guess that's our mantra again in WeedSmart. So visit other areas, learn from other growers. But you then got to get home, match it to your own system and your location, and see how it's going to fit and if it will work. So something like the spring cropping that's commonly done in the UK has really taken off with the Tasmanian growers. But I really want to also encourage the adoption of more non-chemical tools to try and complement herbicides, and that's where the Big Six comes in. So the Big Six, basically, it's just, as I mentioned before, it's an integrated weed management package. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of good information. Australia, again, leads the world globally, I believe, in putting all this together, and then secondly, adopting it. So to go through them, number one, rotating crops and pastures. Number two, double knock. Number three, mixing and rotating of herbicides. Crop competition, stopping seed set, and harvest weed seed control. So they're all things that you all know and familiar with. Harvest weed seed control is something we probably won't talk a lot about today because there's obviously limitations with ryegrass shedding seed prior to harvest and being able to collect it. But certainly the other five of those Big Six tactics are certainly relevant, and there's a mix of chemical and non-chemical there that can be adopted and is already in place. It's just probably sort of formalising or making people aware what they're doing and probably what they're not doing. So there's consultants in the Mallee region of Victoria, for example, who actually lay out a matrix for their clients when they're doing crop planning for the next 2 and 3 years, and they tick off how much of the Big Six is being achieved in those blocks. Historically, planning would revolve around just what herbicide rotation they're using, but now some of these consultants are imposing a Big Six matrix to see how good they are at sort of adopting some of these other tactics. So graphically, diverse rotations is the key, and these are for a southern area, not a Tasmanian area. So you've got crop of fava beans there, so diverse rotations, potentially following things like double break with canola. Double knock, so that's the weed it tool, like using paraquat as a follow to glyphosate to clean up any survivors. Mix and rotate, that's a well-tried message with the herbicide side of things, but there's a lot happening in that space as well with new chemistry. Crop competition, there's a planet barley crop on 6.5-inch rows. The competitive nature of some of our cereal crops in particular against ryegrass is an absolute, really low-hanging fruit that we need to harness more of and put a lot more attention to detail around. Stopping seed set, so hay, silage, crop topping at the end of the season. That's a really powerful tool. If any survivors do get through due to escapes with resistance or just or high numbers, that ability to stop seed set. And then last of all, harvest weed seed control, which I mentioned before, does probably have some limited value in Tassie, but with spring barley, for example, there could be some potential to incorporate it, but largely it's probably down the list compared to some of these others. So rotating crops and pastures, thanks to Ian and Michael for their photos. Spring cropping is a really key tool in sort of mixing up the timing of ryegrass control. So with a lot of the growers explained a lot of autumn cropping that's happened in the last 20 years. The ryegrass has become very well adapted to germinating in the autumn and then right through the winter and spring. So if that's completely changed, so a forage crop goes in early, like you see the dairy adjustment cattle, and then that's followed with the spring crop, so a spring fallow on the forage crop, and in with spring barley, there's some spring wheat's been looked at, but also some of the other options like poppies and potatoes. I even see hemp came up there as a spring sown option as well. So you're basically just targeting that glyphosate with a fallow and cultivation even when it's a bit out of season to when it normally does, and that sounds like it's proving quite profitable, particularly with spring barley. Fodder cropping, the profitability of livestock at the moment is really important and something that Angus is pursuing. So rather than try and fry grass continually with herbicides and winter cropping, why not harness the feed value and complement with other forages in a companion mix? So dairy adjustment and lambs. So they're sort of things that have got a lot of value, and it sounds like it's quite, the adjustment side particularly is right, well adopted. Triple break. So this is a suggestion we found in the high rainfall zone of South Australia on high ryegrass population. So I think there's a Tasmanian bent that could be taken on this, but rather than doing it over 3 years, you could possibly do it over sort of 18 months or 2 years. So where they were looking at hay, cereal hay or silage, followed by fava beans, followed by canola. So what I'm getting at is you're sort of still rotating your herbicides, but you're actually rotating the tactic of not letting any grass set seed in those three sort of sequences. So it's really a grass-free period that you can drive that seed bank of the ryegrass down, and again remain relatively profitable. So that would be something that could be manipulated in a Tasmanian system. So basically, it's really that 3 to 4 year program, looking at a rotation that generates a profit, but also helps drive ryegrass down. So we don't want to be totally anal on the ryegrass and be unprofitable. It's got to pay its way, whatever rotation comes about. So some alternative crop types, as Ian's provided with a buckwheat cover crop there. Terry's seeing some corn silage done just in the last couple of weeks. So these are all really good sequences for late season crops that are out of sync with your winter wheat and canola, for example. High performance pasture, I'm a really big fan. This is a photograph from the Monero in southern New South Wales. So looking at another high rainfall zone that's, this has been a long-term crop paddock and it's been turned out to a high performance pasture and now has a rotation of lambs and trade cattle, and the use of the forage crops. So you've got purple top turnip and the tillage radish there to help open up some of the tighter soils after a period of cropping, but also get diversity back into for weed control options and diversity for the livestock feed. So there's some really, you've probably got more options than other areas in the country. Double knock. So this is really preserving glyphosate. If we're doing all these alternative timing, then we need to use glyphosate effectively. So this is a photograph I took last week. So we've had good rain here in the eastern seaboard this year, and a massive germination of ryegrass on paddocks that we thought previously was quite clean. So yeah, the double knock is a sequential application of glyphosate, then followed by paraquat within 3 to 5 days to pick up any survivors to glyphosate. And even where we've got glyphosate resistant ryegrass, we're sort of doing double paraquats, 2 robust applications of paraquat. So it's basically taking a no survivors strategy. So that's really important, that glyphosate is such a critical herbicide in our farming systems. And the double knock could even take the form of cultivation as well, which Ian suggested is something that is viable in your part of the world. So mix, rotate, and double knock. So this is Peter Newman has developed this over the years in terms of looking at the mix and rotate. Historically, we used to just rotate between herbicide groups, but we've like a mix of triflural and secura, for example. So you're rotating between the different groups, but also rotating mixing between the different boxes. So the idea is to as your crop types rotate from year to year, that you're also rotating between your herbicide groups and mixing it at full label rates. So you've got largely pre-emergent products here, like propizamide or rustler in the white, and then we've got the new Luxamax, which is an alternative group altogether, which has its own box. So it's about not just using a single herbicide like triflural, for example, and then rotating to box of gold. It's actually looking at mixing triflural and box of gold together, and then the following year looking at a mix of propizamide and atrazine, for example. So you're rotating between the groups, and then sort of bringing in as well your group A's, so your clethodim and factor, and then the knockdowns in glyphosate and paraquat. So it's just being conscious of where the herbicides are using and getting that mix and rotate across the groups. So a key thing, if you're going to spend all that money on those herbicides, is actually knowing the resistance or susceptible status of your ryegrass. So testing your ryegrass is still has a low adoption rate, and you see basically it's a hectic time of year prior to harvest. But if you've got the ability to get out there, collect some ryegrass, send them off to one of the 3 labs in Australia, put down a list of different herbicide choices and mixes, it really gives you a clear idea as to what the level of susceptibility with the current herbicide clethodim we talked a lot about, but also just knowing where trifluralin or Secura or even Avidex might fit in your use program. So we've seen in parts of South Australia this cross-resistant ryegrass, a whole range of products due to some really intense simple rotations of canola wheat. So unless you know the resistant status, you actually can't actually pull the lever to do something about it from a chemical or a non-chemical tactic. So you can collect seeds, or you can do the quick test of the live ryegrass and send it off to some of the labs mentioned there, with Plant Science Consulting in Adelaide, Charles Sturt, Wagga, University in Wagga, or the University of in Perth. And I guess we do highlight South Australia with some of that cross-resistant ryegrass being a high pressure point. But here's a paddock that we had tested with a new purchase block in recent years, and it's not just South Australia. It's here in southern New South Wales and Victoria as well. So this is a paddock that has had a long history of canola wheat rotations, and it's now sort of back under control. The grower uses a whole range of tactics. They did some cereal hay. They've been growing double break pulse canola, and it's still rotating the chemistry, but we really had to use non-chemical tools to drive that seed bank down quite low to start with. So admittedly, a lot of those tests there that you see factor and select. So we see some pretty high levels of resistance, or moderate levels of resistance. When you combine those two, we've had good success in that paddock on that ryegrass with some of the mixes, and the Secura and new generation pre-emergence have worked really well in this block as well. So unless you test, you just don't know where you're up to. Crop competition. So it's probably one of the key non-chemical big six tools for Tassie, and I think it's a powerhouse. So there's a photograph of one of our clients that's planted barley, targeted 200 plants a square metre on 6.5-inch rows, so 165 mils. So there's just no room for the ryegrass might still germinate, but it's really about reducing that seed set. And ryegrass is a poor competitor, particularly in the presence of a healthy crop that's well established and evenly distributed. So we look at competitive crops or varieties and being strategic about it. So you might have a block that is quite weedy, that you can adjust your varieties depending on the genetics that suit your part of the world. Hybrid canola has really been a big step forward for us compared to traditional open pollinated. Planet barley compared to older barleys such as I guess Schooner, but then the Latrobe Hindmarsh types. So it's always more competitive. But conversely, if you have a block that is clean and you might be wanting to do a seed crop or some other low competitive crop, take the opportunity. You don't need to do competitive crops in every single paddock every single year if there's something else that you want to have a try. So it's being strategic. This sounds like sucking eggs and a bit of a motherhood statement, but sowing graded healthy seed, it's still something that, large seed is more competitive, has more vigor, can handle more stresses at seeding, and it's really, really critical that we maintain a healthy start. So it's something that's not always adopted, believe it or not. Target plant population. So there's a lot of really good research around this, particularly with you're really lucky to have the hyper yielding cereals project in your part of the world. So they can look at what tiller plant, phenology of different cereals, for example, and what populations you want to achieve to get a set known tiller numbers. So that's based on 1,000 seed weight, and then what target plant population you're achieving with your seeder in your soils. So to complement that, we've got some work by Gurjeet Gill and Ben Fleet from Adelaide Uni. So they looked at a combination of sowing early. So rather than waiting for ryegrass germination and sowing into a cold soil, they went the other way and sowed early with a robust pre-em package. And they found the ryegrass still was present in the crop. There's a range of cereals, wheat and barley, but the yield went up because of early sowing. The seed set went down, and over a period of 2 years and 3 different sites, there was an average of between $160 to $345 a hectare extra income where they had that sow early with the pre-em program. So the crop competition plus that early sowing into warm soils really got on top of the ryegrass, and it just set a lot less seed. So that's valuable information, and I think would have a place in Tasmania as well. And here's a photo from the cereals field day 2 years ago. My wife Kirili was there on part of a Syngenta tour. So that's blatantly looking at crop competition. So beet blackgrass, which has a bit of a similar habit to ryegrass in Tasmania. It's a shedding competitive grass that competes in cereals, and the value of hybrid wheat to compete against that grass species. But I guess another part with crop competition that we're looking more and more at is a connection between competition and agronomy. So looking at the agronomy tools that are out there. This is an NDVI image from winter 2 years ago. So that red zone, so this whole block has been in pH map. So we know where our acid soil zones are, and that historically is always a poor crop zone, has a high ryegrass burden. And as we all know, ryegrass loves acid soils and poor crops. So generally, we've been battling with ryegrass in that zone for a few years. And since, we've come up with a variable rate liming program on top of the herbicide program and the crop competition, and we've been able to actually even out some of the pressure that happens in that area. So using that precision ag link, be it with acid soils or sodic soils or just poorly structured or low organic matter with manure, to sort of get the crops more competitive, improve that soil nutrition to help minimise the ryegrass's dominance. And that's where we're using tools like EM surveys and NDVI and yield mapping data to just pull some of this stuff together and target some of these zones where the ryegrass might be causing problems. Precision seeding equipment. So this is an ongoing area as machinery equipment is improving, looking at that establishment percentage. So are your cereals achieving 80 to 90% establishment, or you're only back at sort of 65, 70? So when you know a target plant population, you might be looking at, I'm not sure, 160 to 180 plants of winter wheat, for example. What are you actually achieving based on the seed size you put down the tube? So precision seeding equipment is growing all the time and doing a bit like that resistance testing. People are wanting to have more data around them to make decisions as whether they invest in a new machine or just update the existing gear. The big one is narrow row spacing. So this is probably the one we debate the most across the country when I travel to different areas, but it's pretty clear, the data. And again, a high rainfall zone like you is probably easily adopted, but for every inch narrow you go, there's a 1% higher yield. So that's so from 12 inch back to 7 inch, that's 5%. So there's it's worked based on a whole range of different people. Charles Sturt University did a monograph on this, which collated all the data from across Australia, and then Glenn Reithmuller in Meriden looked at a project that went for 29 years, and even in a 316 mil rainfall environment, he still found that was still applied. So in a high rainfall zone where you're at 8 to 10 tonne per hectare, this is really relevant. That's seed to precision. So just some of the trends that we're finding across the country. So if you look at something like a disc seeder, so this is one of the newer generation disc seeders. So it's fully hydraulic, so constant down pressure. So that disc unit is in the ground all the time. It's got a lot of aftermarket specs on it. So these Fern wheels from Kentucky in the US, so they are high value piece of equipment to really get that seed onto the furrow and make sure there's no sort of risk of chemical damage, but just to put every seed at an accurate depth, no matter what the soil type or the conditions. And then we've got this crumbler wheel at the back, so it's just dragging a little bit of tilt, but also dragging that bit of trash or residue that might be sitting over the top of the row. So there's disc seeders and there's disc seeders, and if you want to go on narrow rows, you really need to look at a disc seeder. But this also probably helps. A lot of herbicides aren't registered pre-emergent in disc seeders, but these precision machines are giving us a bit more confidence around products that do have a fit. European style machines are on ultra narrow rows, but I think the difference between them and an Australian built gear is the requirement for cultivation. So these don't operate in no-till systems and would require cultivation, which probably works for you post fighter crops and things like that when you're going into high value seed crops or summer crops. So that's a bit of a differentiation that in your part of the world, Tasmania would be working out. Oh, sorry, there's a bit of an anomaly there. So just the last one in this section is the value from stopping seed set. So I've just got to Sorry about that. So stopping seed set is, I guess, a low-hanging fruit where we've got the ability, if you see the green crop, the photograph that Ian sent me there was strategically cut out for hay, so or silage. So they took out the bad ryegrass areas that wouldn't go through to harvest, and then it's picked up for baling as silage. Or really, hay is probably quite challenging in your environment. In terms of canola, you've got over-the-top application of a desiccant like a DST, and then under the cutter bar as well. So picking up any late season weeds that might set seed, and same in pulses. You've got that crop topping ability at the back end of the season. But hay and silage is ultimately one of the non-chemical tools that is really valuable. Oh, so here it's come through here. So stopping seed set. So there's a photograph of the winter wheat being cut strategically. The hay being baled, so that's a failed canola crop in our part of the world. Obviously, you wouldn't have that situation probably during haylage or silage. Over the top, crop topping in canola, and then the under the cutter bar. So I'm not sure how practical that is in your part of the world, but it's been a massive, effective tool, particularly under the cutter bar for late ryegrass that has germinated once the canola started to mature. In terms of some of the application technology that might have a fit, particularly in your high value crops, so Southern Precision is a company that's based in South Australia, High Rainfall Zone of South Australia, and they have been looking at shielded spraying, so bringing technology across from the viticulture industry. And this is a new machine they've put together, which is a shielded sprayer, which historically would only operate on wide rows, would now operate on 250mm row spacings as a narrower space. And the shield is actually guided by a camera as opposed to physical guidance, which would happen in the past. So those little brackets you see above the boom row there is actually a camera that guides the shields between the crop rows. So this is probably not something you might use in your winter crops, but it would have a really good fit in your high value summer crops or spring crops to sort of take out difficult weeds such as ryegrass or other broadleaves. And they've taken it to the next level now. So they've put a weed seeker camera spray in on the shielded sprayer. So it's only just turning the sprayer on basically whenever it sees a weed. So some of that site-specific technology that's come out of the fallow systems is now being used in this space. So that's a change in application technology that it really fits that resistance and weed management sort of spectrum. And green on green is the next level. So as we've been a lot of research happening globally. There's some Australian companies that are looking at this space. So if you look at the top picture there, it's the human eye. So that's what I guess mustard weed we would see with our eye, and that's what an auto weed, which is a system developed in Townsville, a green on green camera. And here's some south, it's all down the bottom. So it's got the ability to distinguish between, they use algorithms, so machine learning, to determine where the weeds are and where the crop is, and not spray the crop. So there's huge implications for that in our industry. So we can see potentially old chemistry or non-used chemistry that's not on the market in Australia could potentially come into play because it's being used at a low percentage across a field, on something like ryegrass or broadleaf weeds, because of the green on green can pick up the weeds only and not be spraying the whole paddock. So that's really exciting, and some further development. You've got a company like Bilberry out of France that's now set up in Perth. So they've based their whole global operations out of Australia because they see we're one of the early adopters in this space. And they've got ongoing trials to distinguish weeds like wild radish from cereals and other broadleaf weeds in fallow. And there's a paper from Guillaume, who presented at WeedSmart last year, from his GRDC work with the green on green camera sprayer, and companies like Goldacres are now looking to follow the lead of AgriFac and have factory fitted green on green chemist tools on their boom sprays to allow the use of such chemistry. So it's coming quicker than we thought, and a lot of work in Europe, particularly with this space. Harvest weed seed control. There's been work done by Southern Farming Systems, said that it is a challenge. So it's widely adopted across Australia and on the increase, but I understand it doesn't have a great fit because the ryegrass tends to shed prior to harvest. Here is is Ray Harrington at the Windsor Farm on that same Syngenta tour, looking at a weed such as blackgrass, which has exactly the same habit as what your ryegrass does in Tasmania, in that it will shed prior to crop maturity and be on the ground before harvest comes into play. And Kirrily, who was on that tour, said you could see the cogs in Ray's mind going, going through the motions of how he could get that blackgrass into a header and destroy it with a mill. But yeah, it's not to say it can't be done, but things like windrowing barley or looking at spring barley, for example, that is harvested a lot later in the season, where some of that ryegrass might still be there. That's something that might warrant consideration, or using chaff lines. So some of the US, North American scenarios where they have quite wet harvests, they can't get the mills to work, so they're looking at chaff lines and grazing them with livestock, or trying to pick them up into a fodder conservation. So that's something that's I think needs to be looked at in time, but not discounted altogether. But it's certainly not a high priority. And some of the opportunities in terms of site-specific agronomy that is a controlled traffic system from one of our clients who's putting his ryegrass onto the tram lines. They're not greys, but you look at the ability to collect that ryegrass and come back with some targeted herbicides in this case. But there's work from Dookie in Victoria where they can apply microwaves. So rather than trying to nuke the whole field, if you just had a microwave that would come in and treat that zone. In the UK and Brazil, there's a company called Zasso. So they're looking at putting an electrical current through a tractor-mounted machine that kills the weeds. So rather than trying to do the whole paddock, if we've got them sort of treated in a site-specific perspective like this down these tram lines that have been collected by the header, then some of these a bit more alternative tools might have a place down the path in future. So growers, agronomists, so generally the industry in Tassie, I think there's a lot of shared learning already happening and needs to continue. But I guess the take home from what I've gathered by talking to the growers is that spring cropping is a huge lever and has a lot of value to sort of alleviate the ryegrass pressure. The diverse rotations have a fit, but really, the herbicides need to be mixed up so that the pressure is not continually ongoing on a small group of Group A or post-emergent products or high-value pre-em like Secura. Crop competition, like I've said, I'm really passionate about crop competition, and there's probably another 5 slides I could have put in about that in ways that we can manipulate to fit into your system. But narrow rows, high plant populations and competitive varieties are 3 things that come to mind straight away. And they're all part of adopting this WeedSmart Big 6. So that's probably some of the key take homes for me. WeedSmart is probably something we need to get onto our resource base is High Rainfall Zone advice and technical resources. So there's a lot of stuff on there. There's a podcast which Michael Chilvers was a part of recently. We thank him for his time. There's webinars. There's the one we're doing today. There's a lot of case studies and videos and online learning and fact sheets. There's a lot of stuff there. We all learn differently as adults. So obviously face to face through your advisor or through other growers is important as well. But that's a good outlet for people looking at other information. And diversity era. So this is another sort of tool that people that want to do learning about practical options. So this summarises a lot of the research that's gone on. There's a recent one with crop competition. There's a pre-emergent one, harvest weed seed control. So there's a range of online learning tools that WeedSmart with our research partners have produced in recent years. So it's all along the same lines as some of the themes I've been talking today. And again, coming to the end, I thank our team Tassie, so Michael Chilvers, Angus Lyon, Terry Horan and Wooly Ian for their help. It's great to have the opportunity to get WeedSmart into Tassie. I've probably missed a lot of stuff today and haven't quite got some of the key concepts across, but I hope I've done it justice for the growers in Tassie. And thank you all for participating in the webinar.
Great, thanks, Greg. I've just got a quick question before I maybe pass over to Michael and Ian to make any comments. We've had a question come in. Can you make a comment about some of the new pre-emergents coming and in development?
Yeah, well, there's four key preems, so I'll just talk their trade name. So
Yep.
Luxamax, which was registered for this year, so that's registered in wheat primarily. So it's I guess we've sort of got used to safety with Boxer Gold and Secura. Luxamax requires really accurate seed placement, so it really needs to be put in at 3 centimetre depth. And in some of your wet winters, I think you'd need to be quite careful. And I think Chris Preston passed on some advice to the group this year with Terry and Michael making comments around that. So yeah, it's a valued product, but probably needs a little bit more development work. The next one is Ultro. So it's a product from Adama in pulses. It is absolutely, it's like as good as Secura on ryegrass control as a preem in pulses, and really safe. So it's due for release in 2021. So it's got another year of development work. But we've seen good crop safety with all the standard pulses like field peas, faba beans, vetch and the like. So it'll be a big breakthrough and be a different group altogether to it's Group E actually. So yeah, Luxamax is Group Z, Ultra is Group E in that pulse space. An interesting one from FMC is a product called Overwatch, Bixlerone. So it's actually a pre-M for ryegrass in wheat, barley, and canola. So it's a new chemical we haven't seen in Australia. So it's Group Q, but there's development work happening for it, and it'll be available in 2021. So and then the other one is Bayer with their Matino Complete. So it's a completely new mode of action due in 2 years' time. So, and potentially we've been working with Bayer locally too to set up some trials in low disturbance seeding systems. So it's not required to have a knife point press wheel as yet. So yeah, it's quite a unique time to see new chemistry coming forward, and I guess it makes WeedSmart even more important that if we have these tactics in place to protect the new chemistry so they last even longer, we don't burn them out through overuse.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And I believe we're doing a webinar mid-June talking about new chemistries with you. So that
Correct, Shannon.
information will be up on our Twitter page and on our website. So if anyone wants to join in on that. I do have another question that's come in earlier. Of the winter crops grown, what provides the best competition in a high pressure paddock?
From our experience, we've generally seen barley as a really competitive crop. So it just has the ability to sort of get out of the ground quickly and then compete through the late part of the season as the ryegrass is sort of running to head. So as it's setting up the seed set. So winter wheats particularly, I guess, aren't as competitive to a degree, but they're still competitive. But it's not. Yeah, barley's probably been the better one. Be interesting to any comment from Michael or Ian what they've seen in their experiences.
Yeah, I'll comment if you like. So certainly there's a big difference between wheat varieties, and I think if we're looking at our long season wheats, we need to be cognizant that there is a really big difference in that early competitiveness. So yeah, think about that carefully. And there's a whole suite of wheat varieties, but I'd agree generally barley is quicker out of the ground and tillers very aggressively, but if it's really wet, it may not be the best option. So
what wheat varieties would have you seen, or are you using, Michael, if you don't mind sharing that are yielding well, but also have good competitive ability?
Yeah, so we're growing a crock. Calibro's very similar habit. It seems to be in the middle, so obviously your relays and things like that are really slow and really late. They're really long season rather. So, they'll grow flat along the ground for months and not do anything. Things like Bennett are a bit more, they're a bit faster. But I think, we've had 14, 15 tillers on a crock, so it'll tiller really strongly. And I think at the moment it's the one I'm growing. So obviously it's my variety of choice.
Yes. Yeah. No, we've seen a crock next to Bennett, and it's quite, it's free tillering and quite aggressive. So a good
Yeah.
one. Is there any other comments you wanted to make, Michael, in terms of some of the suggestions around rotation?
Yeah, so actually, as farmers, we love things that come out of drums because that's really easy. So my first question's around butroxadim, and should we be mixing it with clethodim where we know that we might have very low resistance to clethodim, but it's not going to work because it's, post-April. Yep. Should we be putting butroxadim in with it, or will that limit the life of both?
Certainly. So even Roberto's been doing some resistance testing with the mixers at University of WA this year, and found very low levels of resistance to the combination of clethodim and butroxadim, so the factor.
Yep.
But the big limitation is it's just, we find it very damaging in canola, so we only use it in pulses.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Even at the 80 gram rate. So that's personal experience, and it just sort of takes too much out of the canola and further reduces its competitive ability when you can use 180 grams of butroxadim in a pulse, very safe. But yeah, canola is just not at that level of tolerance.
Yeah. Right. The other question. Do all those, you mentioned 3 institutions that do herbicide resistance testing, do all 3 do mixes?
I guess 2 of them do. I know Michael, what's his name? Roberto is probably leading the charge. And then the Adelaide Uni, they've always, but Plant Science Consulting sort of done it on request, but they're certainly doing more and more of it. So it's really good. So it just gives you that. We just had some back the other day. It was sort of indicating that clethodim was resistant at 50%, 60%. And as soon as we had the factor, the butroxadim mixed in, it was back under 5. So it's really effective to do that mixing with your resistance testing. And the same with the pre-Ms too. Like, we rarely use, say, Secura on its own in a mix these days. So it would either be Secura trifluralin or Secura Avidex. So it's worthwhile getting it tested as such.
Yep. No, I saw a bit of Roberto's work and was quite interested in it. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And Roberto, I think he's about to publish that soon. Is that right, Shannon? Not far off.
Yeah, I believe so.
But Peter Botsalis has just been fantastic. So really, and talked about it on the last podcast, actually, the clethodim use patterns and how it fits in with butroxadim. So he's right across this side of things as well.
Yep.
Yeah, and we've got all the contacts for those 3 places up on the WeedSmart website, so you can get in contact with them if you are looking to get anything sampled.
Righto.
Peter Botzar, like Plant Science Consulting, is the only group that do the quick tests, so the live ryegrass that's sent away and tested, and so we've got some in the pipeline at the moment with that.
Yep.
Great. Okay. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you so much for joining us, Greg, Ian, and Michael.
Pleasure.
No worries. Thank you everybody.
Thanks, Jen.